You see, there's something very curious about the business of waking up. Most people imagine that awakening is something dramatic, an explosion of light, a thunderclap of revelation, a sudden enlightenment that changes everything in an instant. But in truth, waking up is far subtler than that. It's not like being struck by lightning. It's more like the moment between dreaming and dawn, when you slowly realize that the dream was, after all, a dream. When you wake up, you don't create a new reality. You simply see the one that has been here all along. You realize that life has been happening without your permission, that the grass was growing, the heart was beating, the stars were spinning long before you thought you had to control them. And suddenly, you notice, perhaps with a smile, perhaps with a shock, that you were never the manager of this great show, only a participant caught in its marvelous dance. Now, most people live as if the universe were a problem to be solved. They take life terribly seriously, as though it were some sort of examination one must pass. They try to become something, to arrive somewhere, to perfect themselves in some imagined future. But waking up is the discovery that there is nowhere to arrive, and no one to arrive there. You are already it. The journey was always the destination, disguised as motion. Of course, this realization is disorienting. It pulls the rug from under every belief you've carefully arranged to keep things steady, because to wake up is to notice that the floor itself, the ground of certainty, was never there. What you called me turns out to be a story, a string of memories and expectations stitched together by habit. You start to see that this self is not a solid thing at all, but a process, a verb, pretending to be a noun. And at first, that can feel like loss. The familiar scaffolding begins to tremble. You look around and wonder, if I am not this person, then what am I? But then, if you stay still long enough, something extraordinary happens. You begin to sense a vastness beneath the noise, an awareness that isn't yours, yet it's the most intimate thing you've ever known. That awareness doesn't need to do anything. It doesn't need to improve or achieve. It simply is. It watches thoughts the way the sky watches clouds, letting them come and go without ever being disturbed. And when you realize you are that not the clouds but the sky, you have taken the first step into genuine awakening. You see, waking up is not about becoming spiritual or learning new philosophies. It is about remembering what it means to be alive without labels. It's about seeing through the great game of pretending, the roles, the masks, the seriousness, and laughing gently at the cosmic theater we all take to be so real. When you begin to see through it, life doesn't become dull or meaningless. It becomes play. Not foolish play, but sacred play. The divine Leela, as the Hindus call it, where you realize that the universe is not something you were thrown into. It is something you are. And so waking up is not an achievement. It is an unveiling. The curtain draws back. There you are, the actor, the stage, the audience, and the play itself all at once. You find, to your surprise, that you never really left the performance at all. You were just dreaming, you were lost. And that, you see, is the curious thing about waking up. It's the simplest thing in the world, and yet, for most people, it feels like losing everything they thought was real. But that is where our story begins, with the price of seeing clearly. Now, the first thing that begins to dissolve when one truly wakes up is the comfortable sense of belonging, that warm assurance that one fits neatly into the great social puzzle. For most of our lives, we draw our sense of identity from others. We belong to families, to nations, to professions, to ideas. And it feels terribly reassuring to say, I am one of them. But you see, awakening pulls you gently and sometimes painfully out of this arrangement. It isn't rebellion. It's simply that the game no longer holds the same charm. You begin to notice that much of what passes for togetherness is really an unspoken agreement to remain asleep. Society, after all, depends upon collective pretending. We pretend that our roles are who we truly are, that the titles, the uniforms, the rituals, and even the opinions we've borrowed make us somebody. We nod and smile and agree not to disturb each other's dream. It is, in a way, a most polite conspiracy. And then, one morning, perhaps without warning, something inside you stirs. You notice that the laughter at the party feels hollow, that the conversations seem like echoes of echoes. The people you love are still there, but something has shifted, not in them, but in you. You can no longer speak in the language of pretense. The words don't fit anymore. At first, you may think something's wrong. You feel out of place, disconnected, as if the world you once knew has become strangely transparent. You sit among friends and wonder why everyone seems to be performing. You listen to discussions about success, politics, drama, and all of it feels curiously weightless, as though everyone is discussing shadows on a wall. It isn't that you no longer care. It's that you see too much. You see that most of what we call belonging is the desperate attempt not to be alone, and yet it is precisely in that fear of solitude that we lose the capacity to truly connect. For how can two people meet when both are only meeting through their masks? So, as awakening unfolds, there is a quiet withdrawal. Not a bitter one, not rejection or arrogance, but a simple stepping back. You stop forcing yourself into conversations that drain you. You find silence more nourishing than applause, and your absence begins to puzzle those who still inhabit the dream. They ask, "Where did you go?" But you haven't gone anywhere. You've merely stepped outside the play to see it from the audience's view. You realize that belonging, as the world defines it, was always conditional. You belonged only so long as you agreed to stay asleep, to keep the mask on. The moment you take it off, the others grow uneasy. And yet, this loss, the loss of belonging, is the first real act of freedom. Because only when you step out of the collective hypnosis can you finally breathe as yourself. It's like walking out of a crowded theater into the cool night air. For a while, you feel disoriented, even lonely. But slowly, your eyes adjust. You see the stars. You hear the wind. You realize that the silence outside is more alive than the noise inside ever was. To awaken is, in part, to be exiled from the world of appearances. But it is also to be welcomed into something far vaster, a belonging that no group, no ideology, no community can offer. The belonging of being itself. You see, you were never in society to begin with. Society was in you. It was a pattern of thought, a shared dream, moving through consciousness. And when that dream fades, when you no longer need the validation of the crowd, something extraordinary happens. You find that aloneness is not loneliness. It is spaciousness, the space in which all things belong. So, yes, awakening may cost you the comfort of fitting in. You may lose the feeling of being part of the club, the tribe, the movement. But in losing that, you discover something infinitely deeper, that you were never apart from the whole. You were never an outsider at all. You were the entire dance, pretending to be a dancer. And that, my friends, is the strange paradox of the first loss. You lose the illusion of belonging and gain the truth that you have never been separate. Now, after you have lost the comfort of belonging, something else begins to crumble the pursuit of success. From the moment we are born, you see, we are taught that life is a race toward a goal. We are told that the purpose of being alive is to get somewhere, to be somebody, to make something of ourselves, to climb higher, faster, further. And so we run. We run toward approval, wealth, reputation, even enlightenment, always chasing that glittering something just beyond reach. But when one begins to awaken, This whole notion of getting there begins to appear slightly absurd, because the very structure of the chase depends on the belief that the present moment is somehow insufficient, that now must be sacrificed for later. Yet every later, when it comes, is just another now. The treadmill never ends. It merely changes scenery. And so the awakened person begins to laugh, not a cynical laugh, but a gentle one, at the entire enterprise of success, because one suddenly sees that it was all a magnificent illusion, a cosmic carrot dangling from the stick of time. You see, the idea of progress is a marvelous trick of the mind. It keeps us busy, forever polishing the mirror in which we hope to see perfection. But the mirror is already whole. Only our obsession with cleaning it obscures the reflection. When this realization dawns, the very machinery of ambition begins to stall. You find yourself unable to play the game with the same fervor. You cannot force yourself to chase achievements that once seemed vital. The thrill of victory fades. The fear of failure dissolves. You begin to sense that neither has any lasting substance. Of course, to the world, this looks terribly irresponsible. They will say, you've lost your drive, you've stopped caring. But the truth is, something deeper has taken over. You are no longer propelled by the anxiety of not enough. You are being drawn by the quiet joy of already here. Now, I don't mean that awakening turns you into a passive drifter. On the contrary, when you no longer strive out of fear, your actions become play. Work becomes art. Effort turns to expression. You move, but not to arrive. You move because movement itself is beautiful. Have you ever noticed that a dancer doesn't dance to reach the end of the floor? Or that a musician doesn't play a symphony to arrive at the final chord? The joy is in the movement, the unfolding, the continual becoming that has no destination. Life, you see, is precisely like that. It is a song to be sung, not a problem to be solved. But as long as we believe that success is the purpose of living, we are deaf to the music. We march in straight lines while life swirls in circles. Awakening breaks that straight line. It drops you, sometimes abruptly, into stillness where you discover that there is no race and never was. And yet, this loss, the loss of the pursuit of success, is not a tragedy. It is liberation. Because the moment you stop chasing, life starts dancing toward you. Things unfold without strain. Effortless synchronicity replaces willpower. You find that you are lived rather than living. The one who was climbing the ladder suddenly sees that the ladder itself is leaning against the sky and there is nowhere higher to go. The striving self collapses. And what remains is simple awareness, quietly watching the game continue for those still running. And perhaps the greatest humor of all is this. Once you cease striving for success, you begin to do your finest work, because what you create then arises not from fear, not from ambition, but from love, the love of the doing itself. That, my friends, is the great secret hidden behind the loss of success. When you stop trying to win the game, you realize it was never meant to be won. It was meant to be played. Now, when the pursuit of success begins to fade, something far more intimate comes undone, the sense of who you think you are. For the entire span of your remembered life, you've been constructing a self, haven't you? A carefully painted portrait that says, "This is me." You've gathered bits and pieces, your name, your face, your memories, your opinions, your history, and arranged them into a figure you could recognize in the mirror. And for a while, that identity seems real enough. You defend it, you promote it, you decorate it, you call it my personality, my career, my beliefs. You polish the edges, hoping the world will admire the reflection. But the moment awakening deepens, a strange thing happens. The edges begin to blur. You start to see that the me you've been protecting is no more solid than a reflection in water. This realization, at first, is terrifying, because identity is the anchor we cling to in the ocean of uncertainty. Without it, the mind feels adrift. But stay very still, and you'll notice something marvelous. The one who feels lost is itself part of the illusion. Who is it, after all, that says, "I am lost"? It is the image, the imagined center, trembling at the prospect of its own non-existence. But when the trembling passes, you discover that beneath the mask of identity lies not emptiness in the negative sense, but a vast openness, a presence that is always here, regardless of who you happen to be playing today. You see, identity is a costume in the theater of time. You wear it as the universe tries on forms, the child, the lover, the thinker, the teacher. But the costume is not the actor. It is something you inhabit for a while, like a wave taking shape upon the ocean. And when the shape dissolves, the water remains. Awakening is the moment you realize you are the water. You've never ceased to be it. You've simply been busy believing that the wave's crest was the whole ocean. Now, the loss of identity can feel like death, because, in a way, it is the death of the false self, the death of the I that thought it was in charge, the death of the performer who confused the role for reality. But this death is not a tragedy, it's a release. You discover that you were never trapped inside a separate skin bag at all. You are the whole field of experience, the dreamer and the dream, the witness and the witnessed, inseparable from everything that happens. When that realization dawns, even briefly, there's a great laughter, not because it's funny, but because it's so utterly obvious. It's as though you've been searching everywhere for your glasses, only to find they've been sitting on your nose all along. So yes, awakening takes from you the image you once adored. The person you thought you were begins to dissolve like mist under the morning sun. But in that vanishing, something far more real emerges, the awareness that has been watching the whole performance from the very beginning. And the marvelous thing is this: when you no longer believe in your image, you can finally play again. You can laugh at yourself, forgive yourself, even forget yourself. You become light. You move through life not as someone struggling to be important, but as consciousness exploring its own infinite disguise. That is the third great loss, the loss of identity and image. And though it feels like a disappearance, it is, in truth, the first clear view of what you have always been. After one's identity begins to dissolve, the next thing to go is certainty, that precious sense of knowing what's going on. You see, human beings have an insatiable appetite for security, and the mind feeds that hunger by building beliefs. We invent systems, philosophies, religions, and scientific frameworks, not because they are ultimately true, but because they give us something solid to stand on. We love to feel that the universe can be contained in a sentence, that mystery can be tamed with words. But awakening, you see, has a peculiar habit of shaking the floorboards. Suddenly, all the ideas you've carefully stacked begin to wobble. You realize that your beliefs are only maps, and that no map ever contains the territory it describes. The map of fire does not burn. The map of love does not feel. And so you begin to see that reality, this shimmering, moving, ungraspable event, cannot be captured by thought. Every time you say, "This is what it is," the universe smiles and changes shape. At first, this feels terribly unsettling. The mind protests, "But if I cannot be certain, how shall I live? What shall I hold on to?" And the answer comes, not as an idea, but as a silence. You don't hold on at all. You float. You trust the current. You discover that the river carries you, whether or not you understand where it goes. You see, certainty is a kind of armor, and like all armor, it becomes a prison. We wear it for safety, but it dulls our senses and separates us from life's immediacy. When the armor cracks, we feel exposed, yes, but we also feel alive. The wind touches us again. When belief falls away, faith is born, not belief in something, but faith as something. Not the faith that insists, I know the truth, but the faith that whispers, I trust the mystery. That is a far deeper surrender. It is not the arrogance of certainty, but the humility of wonder. To live without rigid belief is not to drift in confusion. It is to dance in openness. It is to recognize that knowledge is always provisional, that reality is too vast for any philosophy to monopolize. You begin to delight in paradox, to see that opposites are not enemies but partners in a cosmic joke. You discover that light cannot exist without darkness, form without emptiness, life without death, and that every attempt to choose one side against the other is to miss the whole. So awakening strips you of the comfort of being right. You stop clinging to final answers, and instead begin to live in the creative tension of not knowing. And curiously, this not knowing is luminous. It is alive. It is full of possibility. You see, the loss of belief is the opening of vision. When you stop seeing through the lens of what you think you know, you begin to see things as they are, shimmering, immediate, undefinable. You no longer stare at life through the glass of ideas. You are simply here breathing in the mystery, and in that there is peace, not the peace of certainty, but the peace of flow, the peace that knows it is perfectly all right not to know. That, my friends, is the fourth great loss, the collapse of belief, the vanishing of certainty. And yet, in that vanishing, reality itself becomes radiant, a mystery no longer feared, but adored. Now, when you've lost your belonging, your striving, your identity, and your certainty, there remains one final illusion that clings like ivy to the mind, the illusion of control. Human beings, you see, are convinced they are steering the ship. We talk endlessly about taking charge, about making life happen, about manifesting our destiny. It gives us a sense of importance, this idea that we are the authors of every event. And yet, if you look closely, you'll notice something wonderfully embarrassing. You can't even control your own heartbeat. Try it. Try to decide the precise rhythm of your pulse, the exact pace of your breathing, the spontaneous dance of thought that flickers through your mind. You will find that these things happen by themselves, like waves breaking upon the shore. You don't make them happen, you are them happening. The sense of a separate controller is, itself, one more wave in the ocean of experience, a thought pretending to be a captain. Awakening is simply the recognition of this pretense. You realize that the I who claims ownership over life is a kind of echo, a narrator who keeps arriving a moment too late to take credit for what the universe is already doing. And when that recognition dawns, something both frightening and magnificent occurs. The reins slip from your hands. The river carries you without asking your permission. You discover that you were never the pilot, you were the current. Of course, the ego protests. It says, but if I'm not in control, everything will fall apart, as if the cosmos depended on our personal micromanagement. But the stars spin, the seasons turn, the cells divide, the galaxies bloom, all without a single committee meeting. Life has been organizing itself quite successfully for billions of years without consulting your to-do list. The feeling of control was never real. It was merely comforting. Like a child clutching the steering wheel of a toy car while the parent drives. The child feels safer imagining he is in charge. But sooner or later, the game grows thin, and he begins to laugh, not out of despair, but delight at the grand joke that the universe has been playing all along. When you finally release the need to control, you don't become passive. On the contrary, you become graceful. Actions still happen, but without friction, without the heavy sense of I must. Life begins to flow through you like music through an instrument. You no longer play the melody, you are the melody. And this, paradoxically, is the beginning of true freedom. Because as long as you believe you are controlling life, you are also responsible for every outcome, every failure, every imagined mistake. But when you see that life moves of its own accord, the burden lifts. You stop rowing and start floating. You stop forcing and start noticing. To lose control is not to be lost. It is to return to harmony with what was never out of control to begin with. The wind blows, the tide moves, your heart beats, and everything is perfectly in order, even your confusion. So, this is the fifth great loss, the surrender of control. And in that surrender lies the revelation that you were never separate from the movement of the whole. The dancer and the dance have always been one. And when you see this clearly, life ceases to be a battle and becomes a song, spontaneous, effortless, and utterly alive. When all those layers fall away, the belonging, the striving, the identity, the belief, the control, what remains is something astonishingly simple. Ease. It's almost embarrassing how obvious it feels. For the first time, you are not trying to be alive. You simply are. The effort to improve, to maintain, to manipulate has dropped, and in its place there is a quiet rhythm, the heartbeat of existence itself, steady and unforced. This is the first gain of awakening, the discovery of presence. You begin to notice things you'd never really seen before. The way sunlight moves across the wall, the sound of wind playing in the leaves, the soft warmth of breath entering and leaving the body. These are not spiritual experiences, they are real experiences. The ones that were always there but drowned out by the noise of becoming. You see, when the mind is busy chasing the future, life happens behind your back. You keep missing the very moment you're in, the only moment that ever actually exists. And then, when you finally stop running, you find that you have arrived in the place you were seeking all along. Here. But here is not a location. It is a state of being, a deep relaxation into what is. Not resignation, not apathy, but trust. You realize that the world does not need your tension to keep spinning. You do not need to hold yourself together, because there is nothing to hold. You were never separate to begin with. This ease is not laziness. It is clarity. When the storm of self-concern subsides, awareness becomes luminous. You see how beautifully ordinary everything is. You discover that the sacred was never hiding in temples or mountains. It was humming quietly in the humdrum of daily life. The kettle boiling, the laughter of a child, the rhythm of footsteps on the pavement. And perhaps the greatest surprise of all is how familiar it feels. Presence does not introduce you to something new. It brings you home to something ancient, something that has always been watching through your eyes, breathing through your lungs, moving through your hands. It's as if the universe finally exhales through you and says, you're back. In that ease, there is no hurry, no comparison, no need to prove anything. You are no longer trying to become. You are being. And being, you discover, is enough gloriously, completely enough. This is the first true gain after the long unraveling. The serenity of presence, the effortless joy of simply existing as part of the great unfolding. You do not add to the world by striving. You honor it by being fully awake to its beauty. That is the fragrance of ease, the stillness that remains after the storm has spent itself, the quiet in which the song of life can finally be heard. When presence becomes your natural state, something extraordinary happens. The walls between yourself and others begin to thin. It's not that you suddenly decide to be more loving, or that you make a moral effort to be kind. No, it's far simpler and more astonishing. You realize there never was a real other at all. The same awareness that looks out through your eyes is looking out through theirs. The same pulse that beats in your chest beats in every creature that breathes. Compassion, then, is not a virtue to be practiced. It is the natural fragrance of awakening. When you stop being busy defending the idea of me, you discover the miracle of we. You see, our ordinary way of loving is terribly conditional. We love those who make us feel comfortable, who reinforce our story, who stay within the borders of our little self. But true compassion is borderless. It has no agenda, no preference. It flows like light, touching everything it meets, including what the mind calls unworthy. This is why the awakened person is not sentimental, but tender. They do not pity others. They recognize themselves in others. To see someone suffer is to feel the echo of your own being as though the universe were flinching within itself. And this changes how you move through the world. You stop trying to fix people because you realize they are not broken, they are in process, as you are. You stop judging because you see that every shadow in another is an unintegrated part of yourself. You stop comparing because you understand that life is playing all its roles perfectly, the hero and the villain, the saint and the fool. Now, this kind of compassion is not weak. It is fierce. It has the strength to look directly at suffering without turning away, and yet to hold it gently, knowing that even pain belongs to the dance. When you live from this recognition, connection ceases to be an effort. You don't try to relate, you simply are related. Words become less necessary. A look, a silence, a small gesture carries the whole weight of understanding. And perhaps the most beautiful discovery of all is that solitude no longer feels lonely. For when you sit quietly in the stillness of being, you sense that everything, the rustling of leaves, the breath of wind, the distant hum of the world is participating in your aliveness. You are not in the universe. You are the universe listening to itself. This is the second gain compassion that arises not from duty, but from recognition. Connection that requires no effort because separation was never real. You realize that love is not something you do. It is what you are when you forget to defend yourself. And from that love, every act, no matter how small a smile, a pause, a forgiving word, becomes a prayer. Not the kind spoken upward, but the kind that radiates outward, silently affirming, we are one. When love has expanded into boundless compassion, something remarkable blossoms a freedom so effortless it can scarcely be described. You see, once you no longer need to be someone, you are free to be anyone. Once you stop taking the play so seriously, you can finally enjoy the play. This is the third great gain of awakening: creative freedom. Before awakening, life was a performance burdened by anxiety. Every act had to be correct, every line rehearsed, every step measured against an imagined audience. But when the mask dissolves, you discover the joy of improvisation. You realize that the whole thing, every word, every choice, every breath, was never scripted to begin with. The universe, you see, is not a factory churning out identical outcomes. It's a jazz band. There is rhythm, but no repetition. There is harmony, but no plan. Each note arises in response to the moment, and that is what makes the music alive. In awakening, you become an instrument of that spontaneous melody. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and begin listening for the music that wants to be played through you. Sometimes it comes as words, sometimes as action, sometimes as silence, but always it comes naturally, without the strain of effort or the burden of intention. This freedom is not reckless. It's not rebellion for its own sake. It's a deep alignment with the current of life itself. You discover that your so-called choices are the universe's choices, that your creativity is its creativity. And when you move from that space, everything you do carries the scent of authenticity. No longer trapped by the need to be consistent, you are free to contradict yourself. You can laugh at yesterday's certainty, change direction mid-sentence, and still be utterly true. Because truth, as it turns out, isn't a frozen idea, it's a living expression. And perhaps the sweetest surprise of all is humor. You begin to laugh, not the nervous laughter of someone trying to escape pain, but the laughter of one who sees the cosmic joke and loves it anyway. You see that the divine is not solemn. It's mischievous. It hides behind irony, behind coincidence, behind the absurdity of being alive at all. So this is creative freedom, not the license to do whatever you please, but the realization that the you who once sought permission was never separate from the source of all creation. Life dances, and you dance with it, not as a performer, but as the dance itself. And when you live like this, every moment becomes art, every conversation a poem, every movement a brushstroke on the living canvas of now. This is the joy that comes after all the losing, the laughter of the universe, realizing it was free the whole time. And so we come to see that awakening is not a straight road from darkness to light, but a rhythm, a great cosmic dance of losing and finding. You lose belonging, and you find authenticity. You lose the chase for success, and you find contentment. You lose the mask of identity, and you find freedom. You lose certainty, and you find wonder. You lose control, and you find harmony. Every loss opens a space, and every space invites the infinite. What falls away was never truly yours. What remains could never be taken. To awaken is to understand that life, in its essence, has never been a transaction. It does not demand your effort in exchange for meaning. Meaning is the movement itself, the swing between form and formlessness, between silence and sound, between self and the whole. We spend so much of our lives imagining awakening as an arrival, a perfect state, serene and unchanging. But awakening is not the end of the play. It is the rediscovery that you were the play all along. You were the actor, the stage, the script, and the audience, each pretending to be separate so that the drama could unfold. When you see this, even your suffering takes on a strange kind of beauty, because you realize that pain, confusion, and loss were never mistakes. They were the steps of the dance. They were the music guiding you home. And home, you discover, is not a destination. It is the quiet knowing that wherever you are, whatever you are feeling, you are already in the heart of it, the heart of this miraculous happening we call life. So, the wise do not cling to awakening as a possession. They simply live it, breathing in and out, playing their part with grace, and laughing often at how seriously they once took the game. You see, enlightenment is not a finish line. It is participation without illusion. It is dancing without fear of the end. And when all has been seen, when even the words awake and asleep dissolve, what remains is a kind of radiant ordinariness, drinking tea, walking, breathing, smiling, the miracle of what was always here. So, let us not strive for awakening. Let us relax into it. For the moment you stop trying to wake up, you discover you were never truly asleep. And that, dear friends, is the dance of loss and gain. The universe playing hide and seek with itself, only to remember in a moment of laughter that there was never anything to lose, and no one apart to lose it.